So this is like a follow-up video to my previous video called The Root Cause of Suffering. So I'm going to assume that you have listened to that before you listen to this, because I'm going to continue talking about similar subjects, but you're going to have to listen to that first to get the basic understanding. But this video is going to be focused more about what exactly the ego is, the so-called ego that all these enlightened teachers keep talking about, and keep claiming is the enemy, and the ego is in the way of enlightenment and whatnot. So, but they never really define it. They never go really into detail what exactly is this mysterious ego, and what can you do about it. So that's going to be the subject of this video, and I'm going to start with Bashar's definition, which is the ego is just like a diving mask focusing the consciousness into the physical reality in a more narrow focus. But that's not really the ego I'm going to talk about, because Bashar also mentions there is a negative ego, but he doesn't talk more about that much. Usually don't go into detail about that. But this diving mask ego, this focusing of the consciousness into the physical 3D, is not really the ego that has any relevance for the self-empowerment journey. That's the negative ego. The negative ego is what you need to dismantle, and what you need to work with, and whatnot to increase your level of consciousness. So that's what I'm going to talk about, how to do, and define what the ego is and how is the best to view it. So basically, the ego is created, or the core of the ego is created right after the physical birth, because of the initial trauma or rejection trauma that you get by default, just by being born into a negative mass consciousness, and with negative, or parents who have negativity and their own core issues lodged in their unconscious mind. The baby interprets any kind of negativity like that, anything less than unconditional love, as a rejection. So that creates, by default, at the very least, in everybody, a rejection trauma at the core, at the deepest level of your being. And that becomes the ego core. So it creates like an alter ego, basically, like a false personality structure being built on that, like a Babel tower of corruption being built on top of that cornerstone that's initially created. And if you have severe and repeated early childhood trauma, you get what is known as multiple personality disorder, which basically means you have multiple split-offs, multiple ego cores, each creating their own Babel tower of corruption on top of them, each creating their own personality prison structure. But that's not really the subject for this video. That's just an example of what happens if you have more extreme versions of the trauma, or childhood trauma. But the default trauma everybody has, or the regular trauma that's considered normal, that creates a single personality, or a single split-off and single personality structure. But it's still an artificial structure that's not really your natural self, that's not really flexible, that's really rigid, like a prison. And you're locked in that prison, because the cornerstone is the initial split-off, the initial trauma, that rejection trauma that's created after birth, and then you have additional traumas that might come from what the parents do and what not, and what happens to you as a young child between 0 and 6 years old. And then you have like protective layers on conditioning and whatnot on top of that again, all the way up till you're 18, 20 years old, an adult. And then basically the whole structure is more or less finished. And then you either you live with that level of consciousness created by that structure, all those resistances to the natural self that is your consciousness is being streamed through, creates a certain frequency, and that becomes your level of consciousness, and you either live with that as your destiny, attracting whatever life you get from that level, or you try to work on yourself and dismantle this structure. That's the path of self-empowerment. That's the path up the scale of consciousness. That's the path, the so-called pathless path, because nobody has walked that path. If you just live in a certain level of consciousness, you will go around and around in a circle, in a karmic groove, and that's not really a pathless path. The pathless path is moving from one karmic groove to the next, hopefully all the way back to your natural self. That creates a pathless path, because nobody has walked it before. Only you can walk that unique path, but everybody else can, most people can just go around in circles, following a so-called karmic groove that's basically carved out for them more or less from the beginning, and they don't really, do anything original usually, but at least with the life in a total view, from the bird's eye view, you don't do anything original. If you just go around in circles, you repeat the same mistake, you repeat the same stuff, you don't learn anything, you don't grow, you don't develop. That's many people on this planet do that. They go around in circles and waste their whole life away and don't really, get closer to the higher levels. But that's the path of self-empowerment. If you want to go up the scale, you have to work to dismantle this personality alter ego structure that's been created, and it's basically a trauma-based personality structure. That's what it is, because it's created from the initial trauma, and everything else is built on top of it. So everybody is basically under trauma-based mind control on this planet. It's just less severe than the MK Ultra program, which subjected people to, or even young babies and children, to severe trauma repeatedly. That creates a much more severe situation, usually involving the multiple personality, and they program all these alters, different alters with different stuff, right? And try to use these people to do things like, commit, they can use them to murder people, or to commit assassinations and whatnot. Like maybe that guy in the Trump situation was actually most likely an MK Ultra mind control guy, because he was training with these agencies in the shooting range. But I'm distracting. The point is, you have a trauma-based personality alter, and that's not really the natural self, because it's trauma-based and because it's rigid. It's like a prison. And you become locked in this prison with most of your awareness being projected through or streamed through that prison complex. And you have a little bit of awareness depending on how integrated you are. You have a certain percent of awareness available as free to you. And then the rest of the awareness is projected through and streamed through this prison complex of the personality alter. To give you feedback and reflections back from life, so you can actually work to this and identify and dismantle the prison from that feedback and from what triggers you as you live your life. And that's how you free up more awareness and increase your percentage of awareness available until you find back to a 100% and integrated, and then jump into the natural self of the higher levels of enlightenment. That's the whole journey in a nutshell. And you have a trauma-based personality complex. That's the real ego, because the initial rejection trauma sits extremely close to the source of your consciousness, which creates an incredible amount of resistance and friction, which basically translates to rage. So basically the core of the ego is pure rage. It's pure satanic rage and hate. It's like the myth of Lucifer being cast out of heaven and raging against God. That's exactly what that myth basically reflects, what the whole process, because everybody is like a fallen angel on this planet. That's the whole idea, right? So Lucifer is not some unique god or something. That every person born into this planet gets a mini Lucifer inside, because that's the initial rejection trauma that sits close to the source and resistance against your own natural self and against life. And it's pure rage, basically, pure satanic rage. And then you have all these layers built on top of it, making it more sophisticated and more sly and more, all these things. So it's, the pure rage is contained within this prison complex, but it's still, working behind the scene, so to speak, and it's the shadow side doing all these things, trying to get its revenge on God and on life and on, and causing all sorts of destructive and self-destructive behaviors, and basically putting people into one of two categories, which a lot of shades of gray in between. And those categories are, you either become like a bully, like, and aggressive bully kind of person who trying to prove that you're not a victim by abusing other people, or you become more like a victim, and the other side of the coin, you become like a victim-oriented person who likes to be dominated by bullies, kind of, even though they don't like it in a way, but still you sort of attract those bullies to dominate and abuse you because you feel safe, or that it sort of matches how you. It's like an approach to feel safe. If somebody takes charge of your life, and then you feel safe because you don't feel worthy to do that by yourself. And the bully is the opposite side. So you have this victim abuser kind of situation, which has been going on for the whole of history, and especially below 200. That's where we have been collectively for a long time, but that's changed recently, and it's changing right now with the mass consciousness being upgraded. But that's what has been going on an individual scale and on a macro scale with the so-called elite, which is basically like the pimp of humanity, and the humanity is like a broken woman, a broken prostitute. The pimp is sort of controlling and abusing and taking advantage of and taxing and taking money from. So that's basically the elite, and the governments using in the collective level is like a big bully or a pimp. And humanity has been like a broken woman being programmed and brainwashed by this bully and controlled and all that, That's the dynamic that's been playing out. And then you had like an influx of all these higher level souls coming here to help and raise the level of mass consciousness and help people, which is changing the dynamic right now, which is create a big upset in the collective, because that's what you see with all the craziness going on since Trump basically won. And that's what we have. I mean, so the mask or the ego is trauma based. The ego is a trauma based alter ego personality structure with pure rage at the center of the structure, and that pure rage basically wants revenge, and it wants to see the whole world burn. It wants to kill everybody. It wants complete destruction. If it can't control everything, it wants to destroy everything. Basically, it's like it wants to become like God. It wants to be omnipotent, and it wants to be dominate and control everything. That's what the ego core wants, unless it's the other side of the flip of the coin, which is basically it wants to be dominated. It wants to be submit itself to a stronger bully, so to speak. So that it creates the whole dynamic of hierarchy, negative hierarchy structure, because the ego always wants to put other people beneath it in the hierarchy, and that's what is going on in all sorts of situations on this planet, and that's so either you become like a domineering person, or you become a submissive person based on this structure, this ego core. And yet there are obviously shades of gray in between, and there are obviously also you can flip-flop between. Like you see many leftist people, they will attack people in protest with bike locks and knock people in old ladies in the head with bike locks and claim they're fighting fascism and all these things. But as soon as they get some payback, or some strong guy from the other side come and beats them up, they play the victim immediately. Like they can flip. Do you see these people flip-flop from being victims to being abusers all the time, in especially in protest situations? The leftist, the progressive leftist, because they are deep in the negativity, deep in the victim mentality, victim abuse paradigm. So what you have with this inner setup of the collect or the negative ego is that it's basically like an inner Lucifer, inner Antichrist that's full of rage but contained most of the time. It can inflame your whole personality, your whole structure, your whole being if you get provoked enough. That's when you see people get pitch black eyes, and go attack people in rage. That's when the ego core has been completely inflamed, taking over the whole show basically. And that's also what happens to serial killers. When they go on a killing spree, they get into this state of being completely engulfed and taken over by this inflamed rage from the ego core, which they can only contain for periods of time, and then they have to go and let that thing take over again, because they usually suffer from severe childhood traumas causing that. And obviously you also have the collective negative ego, which basically is a macro manifestation of all the individual negative egos, creating that collective, and that collective is feeding off of the negativity of everybody, all the negative energy is being generated. And the lower you are in the scale of consciousness, the more you are in alignment with the collective, the more you are being used, and more you're basically serving this collective Lucifer, this collective negative ego. So you can't help but serve the beast. The lower you are, the more you will serve it. Even if you try to be nice, you can't help it. In certain moments, you will lose control. You will create negativity. You will be provoked. You will, do or say certain things, or things will be said through you that hurts other people and whatnot. You can't help that. And it's just a matter of degree. The higher you go in the scale of consciousness, the less you will serve the beast, until you basically escape out of the grip of the beast when you hit into the enlightenment levels. Although even there, you're still not completely out of reach for the beast. You can still be manipulated into falling from grace, which has happened to certain enlightened teachers up through the ages, but it's much less likely, especially at the higher levels of enlightenment. So you are always in the grip of the collective negative ego, which basically is the collective consciousness of this planet, so to speak. But because we have all these people volunteering to clean up the act, clean up their own act, and clean up their own consciousness, and contributing to cleaning up the mass consciousness, that has raised the level of consciousness significantly in the last couple of decades or so. Since the 1980s, 1987, we went over 200 for the first time in history. That's happened in late 80s, and nowadays we're still like in the higher 400s. That's why you see this, big split between those who are into self-empowerment and those who are completely locked into the victim abuse paradigm still, which is the leftist progressives people. They are, most of them, if not all of them, are locked into this paradigm of victim and abuse, and they worship the government and worship the power structure, because that's how they feel powerful, to align with the beast. Even though they think they are fighting evil themselves, they're actually just aligning with evil and doing evil and serving evil and being in service of the beast, which also is manifested as physically as the so-called ruling elite people. And all the minions are the people on the leftist progressive. They're basically the minions of this ruling class elite, so-called elite, and doing their bidding without even knowing it. That's why you see them, they always agree with everything the media says. They always align with everything the media and the government says, because that's how they feel powerful. They feel so powerless inside that they have to align with a powerful structure, what they perceive to be a powerful structure in the physical world, to feel a sense of power themselves. So that if they align with that, they sort of represent that power structure. They can feel powerful, and they can lash out and in self-righteousness and think they're fighting evil when they're not. When the truth is that Trump and the mega people and the truth movement, they are actually the ones into self-empowerment. They are on a much higher level of consciousness, usually in the 300s or 400s. Not many of them in the 400s, but at least in the 300s and 350 and whatnot. So they are much more into self-empowerment and not worshipping the government, and actually taking self-responsibility. And they are being projected onto by the progressive leftist people, that they are like the evil people, that Trump is the dictator and Trump is bad, when they actually are aligning with the dictator themselves and the deep state dictatorship, and protecting and defending the deep state and the media empire and all that, and projecting all their own evil onto the Trump and MAGA and truth movement side, believing they are what they claim themselves to be fighting. But the truth is, if you look at it clearly, you see that clearly that Trump and, why did the whole establishment go crazy when Trump won? Because he's not controlled by them. He's not a perfect guy. He's not even super high level himself, but he's a really thick-skinned guy and a salty sailor kind of person who gets things done, and he would basically act like a wrecking ball to the system, just breaking it open, breaking the whole boil of corruption open for everybody to see. That's what Trump's big mission is, to basically be a wrecking ball to the whole system, like lobbing a whole grenade into the establishment. That's what Trump is. He's not a perfect guy. He's not even a very high-level consciousness guy, but he is perfect for the role he is playing, which is why he has been recruited for that role, because very few people could handle that kind of abuse and psychic attack from the whole mass consciousness and from millions and millions of people, and being threatened by the whole elite establishment and even shot almost in the head. And just walk around like, taking it like he does, like, joking about it. And just a couple of days after he was shot, he was basically joking about it. Like, you have to be a special kind of person, have a really thick skin to be like that and to handle that like he has done. He's done a great and incredible job for humanity, if you actually look at it like that, breaking open and exposing all the corruption and bringing it all out on the table. But he has also provoked the beast and all the minions of the beast, and that's why we have the chaos and the craziness that we see. We've seen in the last since he won the election first time, basically, and with all the nonsense going on after that. And so he forced them to unleash their end game, and that's actually a good thing, because they misfired it and they basically exposed themselves to millions and millions of new people. Everybody's waking up to, or at least everybody at a certain level of consciousness above 330 or 300s, they are now seeing much more clearly that, hey, there is a massive corruption going on, and the tide is turning, but it takes some time to truly turn the ship around. But it's happening, and Trump has played a major part in it, and he's done like he would say himself, he's done an amazing job. And you have to look at it like that in the big picture. Then it becomes much more clear that if people who are provoked by Trump are usually in victim consciousness, because he looks and he acts like a kind of like a bully, but he's bullying not weak people like bullies usually a target. Trump is basically bullying people who attack him and people who represent the beast. Like, he knows how corrupt these people are and the depth of the negativity that they represent. So he has to be tough against these people. That's just how it is. That's just how he is. And many people can't handle that because they're in victim consciousness, and he provokes their victim consciousness and victim mentality too much. So they go crazy because of him. And that's what you see with all these people going crazy. And, obviously the media is portraying him like a dictator with all these lies that they put on him, all the hoaxes that they have, continuously spreading around with, that he's saying all these things that he never said, that if you actually go check the source of everything and go into and look at each hoax, that the Nazis are fine people, that's a hoax, and injecting bleach as a cure for COVID is a hoax. He never said those things. I mean, you just have to go to look at the source, and you will find that everything they say about him is a hoax. It's so easy to check if you bother with it, but most people, and especially the lower level leftist progressive, they never do that, because they already made up their mind. They hate him, and they just take everything the media says on face value because it supports their own idea about him, right? So it's basically a self-reinforcing feedback loop, because most of these people who work in the media are also victim mentality progressive leftists, right? So you have this whole negative thing going on, and feedback loop, basically. And none of this would happen if they didn't have that negative ego that everybody has. But the difference is that some people are trying to self-empower themselves and work on themselves and actually dismantle this inner Lucifer system, this inner Lucifer construction. And that's what it's all about with the path of spirituality, or the path. I don't really like the word spirituality. I like the word self-empowerment more, and even more I like just get back to sanity, because everybody, like I said in the previous video, everybody is basically insane. Everybody is in a psychosis. It's just levels and degrees of it. Everybody is schizophrenic, paranoid schizophrenic, and psychotic all the time. That's what you get unless you reach the enlightenment level. You're in a psychosis. You're in a mass psychosis also. It's all a psychosis. It's all paranoid schizophrenia, basically, because everybody is being gaslit by this inner narrator. It is in a voice in their head, or voices in their head, talking and implanting the exact right thought at the right time to maximize conflict and negativity and and all that. And that's what you get when you have a negative mass consciousness. It's basically trying to maximize its own food source, because that's how it's feeding off of those negative energies. So it will implant thoughts and whatnot in your mind at the exact right moment to maximize the food, the loosh. So it's basically like a big loosh farm. That's what this plant has been, like a big loosh farm. Loosh is the food for the beast, the collective negative ego. And you're creating loosh by default just by having resistances to the natural self, because that's the definition of negativity. So you're creating negative energies being siphoned off into this beast system all the time just by default. And the less negativity you create, the higher you are on the scale of consciousness, the less you feed the beast, the less you serve the beast, and vice versa. So the lower you are on the scale of consciousness, the more you serve the beast, the more you are in service of the beast, the more negativity you generate, and the more food and loosh for the negative collective ego and the collective Lucifer you actually generate. So it's all like a symbiotic relationship feedback system with different layers and levels of it, depending on where you are on the scale of consciousness. And as long as you're not enlightened, you're in the collective negative ego, you're in the collective psychosis, and you have your own personal psychosis bubble within that collective also. And that's your own personal level of consciousness within the collective negativity and then the collective psychosis. And that's the madness playing out in the world stage, and not so many people are taking self-responsibility at this time. Too few still are taking not enough self-responsibility. Sorry, but cannot talk. More people need to do that to actually, if they want to graduate and be part of the ascension mission, and you need to be at least in the 330 and higher on the scale of consciousness which equals more than 50% integrated. That's enough to be on the right side of the watershed, so to speak, to be part of the ascension, according to both Bashar and the raw material. And that's not so very high. That's 330 is pretty much achievable for most people, and that's not super high. But many people are way below that. You see them. It's very easy to check these days who is. I mean, if they're provoked by Trump and hate him, you can just guarantee they're really not really high. They're really usually, at the very least, they're way below the 300s usually if they hate Trump and have this suffer from TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. Then it's very easy to see. So you can just. It's a great test these days. If you meet new people, or if you're dating somebody or whatever. You're going on a date, you can just mention Trump and you see the reaction, and you can just, okay, that person is not going to be compatible with me at all. It's a very good filter to use, actually, because it's not about politics. It's just, if they can't handle Trump and they don't have a sense of humor and, they can't see through what is actually happening and going on, why would you want to spend time with such a person? It's not even about the politics. It's more about just the level of consciousness. You can gauge the level of consciousness really quickly by just mentioning Trump and see how they react, or the reaction, because they can't help but be triggered by Trump if they are low level of consciousness. That's just the beast, the collective beast, hate Trump so much because of what he's doing, and that hate comes through all these lower level people who are in service and deep in the clutches of the beast, of the collective negative Lucifer or ego. So that's just how it works. It's a great way to test your dates and your friends and whatnot. And I would never spend any time with people who hate Trump and who have that problem. They can't handle him at all. They can't control themselves, because that means they're really low level and they're basically just organic portals for the collective negative ego. And there is very little hope that they can be helped unless they you see there is something. Like they don't really. There can be exceptions, but on like a rule of thumb, I will just avoid such people at this time because they're so toxic anyway. And why would you want that in your life? It's enough craziness now anyway. So, from before. So I wouldn't wouldn't bother with such people. So anyway, to wrap this up, it's been a long video now with all sorts of stuff, but the point is that what people, when enlightened teachers talk about the ego, they mean the inner Lucifer, the inner trauma-based personality alter that's created, which I call the inner Lucifer. That's what that is what they refer to when they talk about the ego. And this is like a shadow side, because it's created in the unconscious mind. It's basically what creates the unconscious mind. So it's like, people are not conscious of having this, unless they're, on the path of self-empowerment, and you become more conscious of it. But normal people or regular people have they think they're just, they are normal. They don't have any issues like that. They don't see themselves like that. They're not conscious about this. So this inner structure is like the inner shadow being that is connected directly to the collective negative ego, and it makes them into a portal, an organic portal of the collective negative ego, and that's how the beast works through them and turns them into agents of the beast. When they, whenever they're challenged in any way, like, if you present these people with information that's breaking their paradigm, like, truth about 9/11 or something, like, they can't handle it. They will just go into complete defense and attack you for it or whatnot, because that's basically the beast defending itself and defending the status quo, the system as it is. It doesn't want change because it wants the luge farm to continue endlessly, and it wants to continue generating food sources for all of humanity as much as possible. It doesn't want people to change. It wants to hold people back from that. So that's, it's just a shadow side generated by this initial trauma that becomes like a big raging, inflamed wounding deep inside. And on top of that, you have all these different layers of resistances and like a whole structure. And that's what is referred to as the ego. And the ego, the inner Lucifer, the ego, is also connected to the collective Lucifer, the collective ego, negative ego. So you have like a direct connection. You become like a portal or a servant of that collective negativity. The more you have that inside, the deeper you are in the scale of consciousnness, the lower you are, the more you have that connection to the collective negative ego, and the more you're used as a agent for it, and as a food source, and as somebody who's spreading more and more negativity and creating more and more negativity in the world in all sorts of ways. So that's the whole situation in a nutshell. And the way to dismantle this is to, when provoked in any way, you have to look inside, and you have to allow that provocation to play out and dismantle the trigger in you, and basically identify the triggering thing in you that was provoked, and then you have to sort of let the energy play out inside. You should not repress it or keep it down. You should also not act it out, because both of those are, not healthy. If you act it out, you're creating bad karma for yourself. You're creating more negativity. If you repress it, you can get sick from it. So you have to find a balance between those two, and keep the energy in your consciousness, keep the provoked energy in your consciousness, allow it to play out its momentum, which can take a while, depending. And when it has played out its momentum, and you have listened to it, and you have sort of acknowledged it with pure unconditional acceptance in your mind, it will eventually leave you, and usually drag along with it some kind of root cause that comes like in a glimpse of an insight. When the energy leaves you, you will get an insight of what was about, what this provocation was about, really, because it is always a provocation of something from the past. Because if you live completely in the now, you cannot really be provoked, not like that. You can't be triggered like that. So it triggered something from your past, a past trauma from the shadow self, and you allow that shadow self to express itself without judgment in your conscious mind. You have to be very conscious, and maybe you have to sit and meditate and close your eyes to do this. And then eventually it will leave, and then it will drag along with it some kind of insight that you now get, and it will also dismantle a certain part of the prison complex, and that means you have freed up more awareness, you have more awareness available, and that's a big step in the right direction, and you just continue to do that all the time, as much as you can. Whatever happens, you do the same, you rinse and repeat this, and then eventually you will have found back to the natural self. Ideally, at least you will find the higher 500s, unconditional love levels, if you continue to dismantle. Enlightenment usually requires some kind of jump into those levels and kind of upgrades of the nervous system and whatnot, and other things. So that you can't really dismantle yourself all the way into enlightenment. You can dismantle yourself into the higher levels of consciousness, into the 500s and whatnot, and then you basically are staying in those levels, integrating and maturing. And then if it's your destiny, then you will at some point make the leap into the non-duality and enlightenment levels. But you can't really dismantle yourself directly into those levels. You can just dismantle yourself into the higher 500s and lower 600s. So that's basically how it works, and it's no more hocus pocus than that. It's very simple, but you have to practice it. That's the idea. You have to practice it, and all the time, and that's the difficult part, to continuously and relentlessly practicing it and taking that self-responsibility whenever you're provoked, instead of acting it out and lashing out, and instead of repressing it and keeping a lid on it, because none of those options are really healthy and good for you. So there is only one option of self-responsibility, and that is to allow it to play out within your fully conscious awareness, and then it will leave, and it will feel like a big relief when it finally leaves you. And sometimes it leaves quick. It doesn't have to take a long time. It depends on many things, and of course you have to act on your highest excitement all the time also, because that's how you sort of move through life, and you move into a higher frequency version of yourself continuously if you act on your highest excitement. So those things go hand in hand, like dismantling and taking responsibility for your own shadow side, and also acting on your highest excitement goes hand in hand, and it will also help bring up the shadow side. The more you act on your highest excitement, the higher frequency you get, the more you will squeeze out the inner negative prison system, in a negative collective, in a negative ego, by acting on your highest excitement too. So those two things is like the main practices you need to climb the scale of consciousness and get back to the natural self.